Lust is red, chastity is blue, sin is black, virtue is white. Being a moderate is a gray area. Hold up. Welcome back. This is the Obscured Titan with another episode of Megatronic Legacy. So far, I've made 10 episodes for this writing series discussing characters and plot details. This time, we take a look at this seductive succubus who would eventually be the great-granddaughter to Mesilika herself in the Megatronic timeline, Etna. Etna's been a recurring character in the Disgaea series since its inception in 2003, even going so far as having appearances in other games and merchandise. Just like previous episodes, I will go over the main games and discuss plotline potentials, from Hour of Darkness to Brighter Darkness, from Cursed Memories to both Mikhai Voporak, from Conceptions to Finalization. Into the mouth of hell we dive. Etna leads a squad full of penguin-like creatures called the Prinnies, and is one of the only vassals who stayed in the Overlord's castle following King Khrushchevskoy's passing. In the beginning of the game, she attempts to get Laharl to wake up, in other words, using weapons such as drills, guns, and swords. At that point, she's Laharl's closest vassal, though not quite loyal, assisting him in his desire for power and is the only one to be in the battlefield for her prince. Acting carefree but very devious, she's often difficult to tell for who she works for. However, she holds a great amount of respect and loyalty to King Khrushchevskoy, Laharl's father. She appears as a primary character in the game. She's portrayed as calmer compared to her previous role, but still maintaining her snarky attitude. It's revealed that Etna has an older brother named Xenolith. Xenolith would occasionally appear to Laharl's party as an unknown demon protecting an angel and would fight off the demons. Throughout the game, Xenolith appears and remarks Etna in her familiar visage. He also points out Etna was born with a power so immense it would have killed her. Because of this, he donned the artifact of absolute death within his body to absorb that deadly energy. Despite Etna scoffing at her brother's noble actions, Xenolith absorbed it to the point of becoming a being of great power. After their defeat of it, the artifact relinquishes its hold over him and breaks into pieces. Xenolith asks Laharl's party to tend to Etna, who has become engulfed in a stream of dark energy. The rest of the story afterwards is the party attempting to save Etna from her horrible fate, and manage to. She demands an interrogation on her brother following his survival. He smiled as the pillars of earth which he got trapped in prior to his transportation and left. After going through a slumber, Etna wakes up to see Flan outside of the Overlord's castle. This one isn't as relevant, but still worth bringing up. Etna quits serving Laharl over a fight of pudding, a rare delicacy from the Sea of Gehenna. Yeah, over pudding. Let that sink in. She becomes a demon lord and takes a Prinny squad with her. Traveling to Veldheim, she hopes to kill Overlord Xenon. However, she ran into Adele and Rosalind, defeating them easily. His party left while Etna continues on her journey to seeking Xenon. She eventually meets Xenon in the tournament and defeats him easily, but he revives himself afterwards without her knowing this. In episode 9, she offered a fake Demon Lord's nail and was accidentally summoned by Adele's mother. This also drops her level to 1 and decides to join the team in order to get her powers back. Etna's life began at a southern rural area at Beastmakers in the Dragon Realms, implying her mother was a dragon and her father was a Promethean. She was born on October 14th, 131 BC, but as she grew up a few hundred years old, a proxy war occurred between Mesilika's army and the dragons. It got so bad, families were separated, including Etna herself. Getting lost in a storm of soldiers, she was dragged by Mesilika herself. She took her in while the fight was going on. Not much was heard or seen of Etna's biological parents following her capture, but this implies that Etna is taken in as Mesilika's servant throughout her years in Mystica. Mesilika believes that Etna would one day make a good asset to her team, and spews her lies that she's her true ancestor in blood. As years go by, Etna grows up into a scheming, lustful, and skilled agent under Mesilika's command. Not a second command like Zolkar is, but she often takes tasks such as assassination, third-party investigation on factions that will try to double-cross Mesilika, and much more. Much of what Etna will be is her scheming aspect. She spent much of her time to screw up Laharl and others in order to take over. I mean, we even got Etna mode. This could imply here. However, she'd be loyal to Mesilika, much of that level to King Khrushchevskoy in the official canon. She also offers her ideas to Mesilika to further critique or work ways out in their plans. Now, one aspect I wanted to explore is her insecurity issue. See, Etna looks up to Mesilika, and one of her traits is her emphasis on sexual symbolism. The lieutenant would apply herself to it and use as her coping mechanism to deal with not having a lover, often tricking her victims into one-night stands, either it be arousing her enemies into submission or outright manipulating them. But this occupation Etna takes would leave her to feeling more lonely. Typically, people like her would feel this way because she doesn't have a lover. That is, until now. I figured it'd be good to mention their respective canons before discussing their origins in the Megatronic lore. For starters, Mikhai Voporak, forgive me if I somehow butchered the name's pronunciation, in Gigi's novel series called The Seeking for the Lost Northern Stars, originally known as Sarek. He grew up in a violent environment. He was born in the gangster band Tue Kozahi man, who was expelled from a clan due to his criminal behavior, and a robber woman. Spending his childhood stealing jewels for his family, Sarek grew up having a negative look on the Kozahi people. Becoming a teenager, Sarek used to get involved in gang fights, one of which happened near the royal palace. The guards attempted to suffocate him. Afterwards, though, Ivor decided to take action. After some scaring happened to the guards, Ivor adopted Sarek as his pupil. The young boy changed his identity to, again, pardon the pronunciation, Mikhai Voporak. He considers his old self, Sarek, dead. Living a life of luxury and power, he received special training for war and participated in military missions as he grew older. Voporak was a clan leader on Stealth, and when the Brotherhood of Makuta took him for experimentations, Sidorak betrayed him to them in an attempt to earn favor, or rather shouldn't, using substances such as Radaka's Reduca and energized Protodermis. Voporak turns into a being sensitive to time-space continuum shifts, allowing him to detect the Mask of Time. Learning discipline, the Brotherhood sent him to the Dark Hunters, in which it caused him to switch loyalties, essentially becoming the Shadowed One's simp. What I planned out for both of them in the Megatronic canon goes as follows. Mikhai Voporak, originally named Sarek, was born in a hostile environment where crime and violence is accustomed to the southern regions of Voya Nui. He was looked after by a Promethean man who was expelled from the Dark Hunter clan due to his treason to the Shadowed One, and a Promethean woman who was a chief of the same clan. His childhood consisted of stealing precious jewels and minerals for his parents, and grew a negative view of his own kind, especially those who stand by the Shadowed One's demands due to his father's exile. Even as a Promethean himself, didn't stop his insane hatred growing inside. He felt so ashamed of his beginnings to the point of wishing he was never born. His main goal was to avenge his father. During the Zergotronic era by 1925, Sarek was caught in a crossfire between the Skaktai and the Dark Hunters, in which Zerg takes over the central and northern regions of Voya Nui, and got captured by Radak. Upon captivity, Chancellor Zerg analyzes Sarek's status. He realizes that he has the potential to be his servant. He was transformed into a biomechanical being known as Mikhai Voporak, having wings that have blades of an eagle's feathers, muscle structure of the Paraka, though leaner in mass. It even declared Sarek to be dead. Taking the name of Mikhai, he works to fight Zerg's opponents. However, Mesilika forms an alliance with Zerg to strong-arm against the Dark Hunters with no mercy. Mikhai and Etna would end up having a relationship and work together. Voporak was a being who was brought into Zerg's regime as a weapon for him and the Paraka. What he admires is loyalty. Anyone who commits treason against him and his superiors is punishable by death. The Paraka would then capture and plan to destroy him for extracting his synthetic energon he was infused with during cyberization. Similar to his official canon, Voporak was part of the Zerg Paraka regime until the Paraka's betrayal changed his loyalties to Mesilika after Etna and Mikhai saved him. Funny enough, Voporak would come off as an Omega from Sonic. He destroyed anyone who would go against him and his superiors as a warning sign that his time-affected abilities are not to be taken lightly. Speaking of time, Voporak in this continuity would have a similar effect, except his body would be fueled by synthetic energon, Zenthetic energon, the antidermis and TFP synthetic energon for this series, and a relic Chancellor Radaka implanted inside Voporak's chest, connecting it into his arms and head. He's also been dosed with a powerful gem which originated from gold energon, a resource which the Paraka stole from the Genie realm. This also made it so that Voporak can utilize his temporal force abilities against anyone and turn them into dust in a matter of seconds. Etna's journey into this political warfare begins with the early years of both World War II and the Metro War in the early 1930s. In a time when socialist factions were beginning to regulate their country's economics, moral values, and direction as to where their interests would lie. But among all other regimes that are involved in this war duo, Mesilika's Socialist Union regime would be one of them. Mesilika realizes that Zerg and the Paraka have important materials needed for her militia and wants to negotiate with them. The Dark Queen sends Etna on a task to occasionally watch the Paraka squad and ensure that they do not attempt treason behind their backs. The lieutenant implants a microchip on Radak as a means of ensuring integrity. I already went through Voporak's potential biography for the series, so we'll move on. Prior to the Paraka's betrayal against Zerg and capture of Voporak, Etna would meet Mikhai Rankash in 1935. What stands out for her is that Mikhai isn't so much of a deadbeat loser as other folks Etna succumbed them into submission. She tries testing him to see if he'll give in to her. Many of her attempts would fail. One part I think should be mentioned is the conflict between Flan and Etna. Their moral code would contrast on some aspects, the former resembling chastity and compassion, while the latter is lust and bribery. In 1943, Flan and Etna would fight as Decepticons and Allied forces were fighting, just as bloody as they would with National Socialists and Communists. Flan fought as hard as she could against her, Mikhai, and Voporak alone, only to be rectified by Duncan Carterson, aka Buzz Lightyear, who was in combat at World War II. This would end with a fight against Megatron, infused with dark and light energon. Think of him as Super Eggman in Sonic 2, but replace Chaos Weed with both light and dark marijuana. After the Decepticon tyrant perishes in an intense fight, Etna and her crew fled back to Mystica. As time goes on, Etna's feelings towards Mikhai were becoming less lustful and more emotional. Realizing how headstrong he is, she gets closer to him as an ally. They'd occasionally discuss their personal problems, with Etna yearning for friends and family she wants to have one day, and not just soldiers in battle. But here's a catch. Mikhai is mostly cyberized, meaning he has no organs for Etna to have with. This discourages her greatly. Despite this, Mikhai would motivate her, reminding her that they have goals to accomplish and would finish them as a team. While Mikhai remains nihilistic to his past and loathes his enemies, he also sees value in Etna, despite her confused view of her own, and wants her to be a stronger leader for the team. Before segueing into Voporak's capture, I want to quickly touch on to the invasion of Migrandia Nui in 1947, hence it taking place shortly before Zaktan pulled the plug on Zerg. The Zerg-Paraka Syndicalist Union invaded several counties of the continent that it drove a third of the island's population to migrate to other worlds, America on Earth being one of them. Now on to Voporak's capture. Etna got word from Zerg and Radaka that the Paraka squad took half of their military machinery and captured Voporak for experimentations. She quickly went to Mesilika for the news and told her. Mesilika gave the lieutenant the order by attempting legal assassination. Etna and Mikhai sneak into the Paraka's hideout up in the southwestern region of Oya Nui, Thok's home, and plan out their assassination. But as they do, Etna suggests breaking the encased lockets protected by Shadow Mist, while Shadow and Light will remain the only elements immune to Voporak's time-sensitive abilities. This doesn't protect Etna from attempting to destroy them with her power sniper rifles. Etna and Mikhai make their positions and fire the weapons against the lockets encasing Voporak's large hands. This gives the green light to the massive being to eradicate Radak, Avak, and Vizak in a matter of seconds. They saw this as an opportunity to put their teamwork skills with Voporak to good use. Voporak threatens he'll use his power for treason, but Zaktan, Hakan, and Thok make their way out of their hideout, essentially driving them out of Thok's home state. They try to re-establish their faction, but the Zerg Paraka has been collapsing. This allows both the Migrandia militia and Etna's team to dissolve it even further. Zaktan's life would come to an end when he puts on power armor that resembles Ernak, but instead of being a nightmarish myth, it's simply a suit of armor that comes closer to Egg Emperor and Sonic Heroes. He uses both light and dark elements to protect him from Voporak's temporal force abilities. However, Etna and Mikhai would exploit Zaktan's weakness and eventually depower his light and dark mist. This gives Voporak his chance to go for the kill. Their revenge is complete, and so has Zerg and Mesilika's. This would take place after Clans of Conflict. Etna and her crew return for a new mission Mesilika sends them on. Create a clone of Godzilla. Etna theorized that it would be possible to do so by taking a piece of the 1954 Godzilla's bones, his DNA, and inject into an underdeveloped zygote egg. All of this info regarding to it was already discussed in my Godzilla video, so let's keep going. Flan just rejoined the American government after she quit in 1917, and received word on a suspicious squad of war criminals attempting to infiltrate an area where both it and Japanese government restricted from entering. She goes to find out who is doing this, and it turns out to be the Demon Squad. Etna, Mikhai, and Voporak succeed in taking Godzilla's DNA and inject it into the zygote embryo in an attempt to make their way back to Disgaea. However, Flan crosses paths with them, making it the second time they meet since their encounter from World War II, and fights them. This ends with the Godzilla egg disappearing into the Middle East in an airborne fight with Etna, and hasn't been found up until 1979. To make this long story short, the Iranian regime has found the Godzilla embryo, but Nasty Nork, Elite, and Lin Kuei forces found it and form a temporary pact to retrieve it. I already made videos touching on that subject, namely Velvet Crow and Shantae. Give those a watch. This will specifically go into Etna and her crew's betrayal of Velvet Crow and Velvet Retaliation. It's no secret Etna is well accustomed to her treacherous tendencies. This won't be any different, albeit less comedic in tone. Etna, by Metallica's orders, uses Velvet to get the Godzilla egg by utilizing a satanic magic rune, which allows her to control a globe which transforms into any type of weapon. She makes it to Velvet as if she can use it with her emotions to do so, when it's later revealed to Velvet that she lied to her. Etna kept this deception discreet as long as she could in trying to match Velvet's wrath towards her foes in any way she could despite tensions. It got much tougher for Etna to handle when Velvet confronts Velvedam and the elites to steal the egg from them. I had one idea of Etna following Velvet to make sure her lie about the globe being controlled by emotions is not exposed and the mission failed. I may also consider a possibility where Etna doesn't need to physically show up, but have a camera chip clipped to Velvet and see how she reacts to everything around her. But in the end, Metallica and her minions betray Velvet, and the great escape ensues. This will cover both Birth of Godzilla and Dark Redemption. In Birth of Godzilla, Shantae and Repto gave life to Godzilla with light energon. This makes the monster a pet to them, which nulls Etna and her allies' chances of controlling him. Etna discovers the information and brings her crew to hunt down the ones who took Godzilla from them. Throughout the film, Etna and her allies would cross paths with Ryoko, Teletia, and Shantae from time to time. Some wins and some losses on both sides. But bottom line is, Etna gets a bit of info in this ordeal and sends it to Metallica about what was going on. In Dark Redemption, Etna discovers the Genie Realm shut down and reports it to Metallica. She's sent with a crew to invade the depowered Genie Realm. Upon entering, Spyro, Conker, and Flan wake up to see who is here. Etna's encounter with Flan rekindles their memories in World War II and battle each other once again. Throughout Dark Redemption, after going through a giant portal to Disgaea, Etna, Mikhai, Voporak, and General Zokar are sent to look for the Matrix of Leadership, which has since been discovered somewhere in Munitions Forge later on. Etna's desire for revenge against Flan grows stronger as she does everything possible to destroy her enemy in order to safeguard the Matrix. She's fought so hard. Etna hoped that she could be loved by Metallica like an actual child to her parent and the family. But all Metallica saw in Etna, and others for that matter, are pawns. Though there is a certain point where the queen has a deep level of respect, not necessarily a personal catharsis, or rather love. This discourages Etna as she is thriving to find out where she came from. She couldn't possibly have been a demon and maybe born with a mix of species, as she thinks to herself. Maybe she did have a good life before an invasion and being taken in by Metallica under her wing. The only people whom Etna came to care for, aside from Metallica, are Mikhai and Voporak. She comes to understand the anguish of their past as she did. She was the daughter of two parents whom left her at war. Mikhai much the same, but with different circumstances. And Voporak being betrayed by the Paraka squad. But how could they be when being branded as war criminals themselves? They are simply pawns in Metallica's chessboard. But deep down, they're victims who grew to becoming monsters of their own. Taking the pieces of their past, they all transformed themselves into one future that makes them more than a trio of bad guys. A family of broken victims who do bad things in order to survive and push themselves further than their enemies are willing. Proceeding onwards, Etna and her allies fail to defeat Flan and Spyro, which leads to Metallica taking the light dark energon weed and vanishing into the final fight. and fled somewhere to avoid being seen. Not much is heard from Etna, Mikhai, and Voporak again, though traces of their whereabouts could indicate their return to power during President Conqueror's reign in the early 90s. Growing up in rural regions of Beastmakers, Etna was a daughter to a dragon mother and Promethean father, but a war broke out between Mesolika and the dragons. She got lost in the storm of victims who perished in battle, and loses her parents in the process. Mesolika finds the little girl and takes her in as her servant. For several years, Etna has worked from a slave to a lieutenant in Mesolika's militia. She believed that Mesolika is her true ancestor, hence their tails, wings, and claws, despite not knowing her prior to the proxy war with the Dragon Realms. Despite having a position above most of Mesolika's troops, with the exception of General Zolkar, and having to seduce victims into submission, Etna has been feeling lonely with no one to give comfort and care. That is until meeting Mikhai Voporak. Mikhai, originally Sarek, was also a boy of a family in a violent environment. Being taken into the Paraka regime, he was transformed into a cyberized entity with no emotion. Using an axe and Zammer pistol for combat, he's a tough force. Also utilizing his wings, he can be just as much of a terror in the sky as Etna is. Mikhai's confident exterior drives Etna to wanting a partner to be with as these war criminals go about their duties, and despite the former being cyberized, the latter still wishes to form a bond. Voporak was once a clan member until the Paraka took him in for experimentation, and undergoes an update where he could turn anything into dust in seconds, except for forces beyond timely control such as light and shadow, for instance. Paraka's betrayal to Mesolika, Zerg, and Voporak led to Etna and Mikhai carrying out their task in rescuing one of their own comrades from a deathly experimentation and assassinate Zaktan's corrupt plight, as they themselves were already corrupt. But what the three war criminals have in common, Etna, Mikhai, and Voporak were all victims of betrayal, loneliness, and melancholy. However, taking those broken pieces of their past built up one where they could become a powerful force of destruction to their enemies. Trusting each other to be more than just war criminals, Etna and her allies are a family of their own. Etna's place in the Disgaea series remains strong even with the Defiance of Destiny being out about a year now. Her character was cathartic in the series that even if it's not Laharl-centric, she does add some level of interest. After all, she's the poster girl of the franchise. Voporak and Mikhai Voporak being her allies in this series make this an opportunity to give Etna a more interesting take. Unlike most villains in the series, Etna's team could get their protagonist roles and have some relatable traits to them despite being portrayed as villains. The next episode I plan on going into is the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Buzz Lightyear. Yes, JFK will get a mention in the episode, but mostly Buzz. Thanks for watching. Feel free to subscribe if you like what you're seeing here, and I'll catch you all next time. Let's get to 500 to get community tabs. Over and out.